you to take your seats, and we are starting our session, our afternoon session, and the floor will be given to our Polish friend and expert. You might have noticed that we have quite a strong Polish community. During this seminar, our visitor and expert today is Professor Tomasz Zarycki, Professor of the Social Studies at the University of Warsaw, and indeed an expert in the discourse analysis, social geography, epistemology, political and social sciences. It is his first time to be in the Moscow School, and I look forward to it. Thank you very much for your invitation. This is indeed a unique experience to be at the school, and what I would like to say on my behalf is a subjective view of the role of intelligentsia, which is generally a common term, of course, but the role of intelligentsia in the social society built up in the Central and Eastern Europe, and even though there may be some attempts to compare it to other countries. So the intelligentsia, the first question that I was asked here myself, is there such a thing? Is there intelligentsia? And this is a very subjective question indeed. I might suggest my positive answer, because I do believe in the existence and role of intelligentsia, although there are people who do not trust in the actual relevance or existence of such a concept. The second key point is, what is intelligentsia? Who belongs to intelligentsia? And there are different replies which are possible here. And indeed, nobody should at least be denied the right for definition or for defining the term of intelligentsia, and as long as it exists, those who are interested in its role, those who can call themselves true intelligence, and how do you formulate? If I were to be asked an opinion as to what I imply under the term of intelligentsia, I could say that I could give a somewhat abstract definition. Intelligentsia is a social group whom Pierre Bourdieu called cultural capital, to whom the cultural capital is the central component of a social status. Pierre Bourdieu, indeed made a distinction between cultural capital, economic capital, and political capital, and he believed that cultural capital was a part of the political capital. Other social scientists have proposed that they can be referred to three types of elite. The economic capital, and the elite of the economic capital will be considered to be the bourgeoisie. The elite of the cultural capital is the intelligentsia, and finally there is the elite of the so-called political capital. And in the post-Soviet space, the place of this elite is taken up by the former Soviet time nomenclature. So these three types of elite, their roles is that the particular type of capital is central to them for both defining their social status, social position, and for reproducing themselves. And the key point here is the transfer of the social capital to the next generations. Let me repeat by saying that intelligentsia is that type of elite to which the cultural capital is central, and which is the central resource for giving this assignment to the next generations. An intelligent representative of an intelligentsia may be a businessman, he may even have some economic resources, he may even have a political role, but none of these roles will be central to that person. When he or she loses the money, their status would not change or alternate significantly. That would not mean the actual loss of such status. But of course, this is a rational approach, but many might object. Many might say that people would talk about the importance of education, but I would have said in the context of Central and Eastern Europe, education is not sufficient, even the best educations. Because there are criteria of the knowledge of universal culture and national culture. There are criteria of education and upbringing. And last but not least, the criteria of social descent, even though this may not be the importance of the so-called value of intelligentsia, and even though they consider themselves to be an open-end social strata, you will still see that there is a big deal of the social reproduction, and most of the representatives of the so-called intelligentsia in Poland would be representatives of the next and subsequent generations of the intelligentsia in the Polish society, which makes it, if not a hereditary thing, but at least a thing where social descent is of a certain value and importance. This is, by the way, an important characteristic of the Polish society and some of the other societies of the Eastern Europe, is that intelligentsia is the only group, the only part of the elite which is in a position to retain its status, as they have been able to do that over the past 100 years, in spite of the revolution, communism, and the economic crises. The status of intelligentsia has been inherited from generation to generation. And some other social classes, it may be said, have not been able to do that. And my statement thus is that intelligentsia, my main thesis is that intelligentsia not only exists, but it is still the ruling or the domineering class in the Polish conditions, and in a way, in less pronounced degree, in the conditions of other Central European, Eastern European countries. Poland is often compared in this sense with Hungary, but Czech Republic, as many believe, is close to the Western societies, where the status of elites is more defined by the economic capital. So we can speak about the three fundamental elites: the economic elites, then Central European countries and Eastern European countries with Poland, and then further up north, where the political capital is probably domineering, and where even in the communist times, these countries were different from the Eastern Bloc countries, where such as Poland, where the communist nomenclature was able to reproduce. And even in the communist times, Poland and Hungary was very much different. Poland and Hungary were very much different from the USSR, because neither in Hungary nor in Poland there was such a reproduction, as the children of the communist elite would go to other spheres and not enter the so-called political class, as it had happened and was happening in the Soviet Union. And to a degree, this is still the case, because a part of today's Russian elite is related to the former political elite, the nomenclature of the Soviet times. What difference do we see here between Poland and Russia in terms of the role of intelligentsia? Let's talk a little bit about the historical perspective. I said that what happened in 1989 in Poland, the fall of communism, was at the same time a revolution by and for the intelligentsia, which indeed put the power from the communist nomenclature into the hands of anti-communist nomenclature, intelligentsia. Whereas in Russia, and you might argue with that, this is a more of an internal thing, internal struggle within the elite, of which the liberal part, together with President Yeltsin, received the power from the more conservative parts. And even though the intelligentsia was involved in this struggle, it was by far not the central factor, which makes it quite different from Poland. With time, from mid-1990s, the Russian intelligentsia, as it seemed to me, departed from the governmental affairs completely, and was marginalized from the standpoint of the authorities, and became a less important or influential factor, whereas in Poland, and the Poland friends might agree with me, intelligentsia had stayed the central piece. In mid-1990s, in 1993, the elections were won by the former communists, the Social Democrats. Then they lost the power in 1993, and they came back to power in 2001 when the former communists came. But these were only temporary spells, and this did not mean that they could have the control of the government. So the power shifts from one party to another, and the Polish state has never been such a strong one as the Russian state. And the very fact that being in the government did not allow the former communists in Poland to in any way have such a all-permeating control as one can observe in Russia. At the same time, one may see that throughout the 1990s, there were attempts to consolidate this power, especially, and this authority, especially in the to consolidate this power and influence according to the Russian templates. Such attempts were made in Poland, but such attempts were blocked by the anti-communist majority, partially the intelligentsia, and such attempts were botched. At the same time, Poland was gradually integrated with the European Union, and economically speaking, the Western capital entered the country, and with this substantial support of the liberal intelligentsia, which was viewed by many as a choice between the communist elite, which was trying to consolidate the Polish economy, and on the other hand, the suggestion and the offer to open the doors to the Western capital. And this second capital, which was supported by the intelligentsia elites, who believed that it was better to create a dependent economy than to transfer it into the hands of the former communist elite. As a result, in the first decade of this century, the former communist elite and the former communist apparatus were quite marginalized, and on the other hand, we have this conservative and liberal views, and even as heirs of solidarity movement, which today are being divided into two camps. There is the central camp, which is headed by Mr. Tusk, and the conservative camp, which is headed by the former Prime Minister, Mr. Kaczynski, and they are debating not even about the past of Poland, not about economics, but about the values of intelligentsia. This is my perception of such disputes, and I think that many of such disputes can be reduced to who is a better representative of intelligentsia. At the same time, the big chunks of the economy are controlled by the Western capital, which are believed to be more or less benevolent, benign, and neutral, with not interfering with the cultural and political life, which indeed serves to strengthen the role of the economy. And strengthen the positions of the intelligentsia, because the Poles continue their existence by concentrating primarily on these cultural values and the debates about intelligentsia. So, as I could possibly say, is that this character of nature of the Polish state was more or less crystallized around 1918, after World War I, when the new Polish Republic, the young Polish Republic, became an intelligentsia-based state, a state where the intelligentsia played a pivotal role, a key role, which indeed defined the Polish civil values and political values according to their views, which are in many ways post-nobility. Post-nobility, because a Polish a member of Polish intelligentsia is in many ways the minor Polish landowner of the past, which indeed may refer us to the Polish 19th century, when there was a lot of disputes between the landowners, the big landowners, the bourgeoisie, and the small landowners, which had usually been losing influence and were losing their estates and were increasingly urbanized. You can see that the elite of the old social capital, of the old nobility, which was indeed eroded or washed away from the Polish social landscape, the bourgeoisie, and finally the nascent cultural elite of the so-called cultural capital, which were the petty landowners of the nobility, but mostly poor. The October Revolution marked a watershed which did not touch upon Poland. It is true that Poland did not become a communist country, but the October Revolution, however, led to nationalization of a big part of the Polish resources. And as I would say, marked the result of 1918. And the non-bourgeois elite, the intelligentsia elite, created the Polish state of the beginning of the 20th century, which created a state with very poor economy, but with good establishment, educational establishments. And this model of a ideal Polish intelligent was perpetrated. This model still exists, and even the communists were not able to dilute it. Even though many of my Polish colleagues would have said that the communism was a catastrophe, but a catastrophe to the intelligence because so many of the Polish intellectuals died in the Gulag, and it is true. But there was nothing in Poland that could compare to the Stalin's repressions, and Poland did not have the great terror of the 1930s, where such a big part of the former Russian intellectuals and their families were exterminated. So the Polish intellectuals survived, and intelligentsia survived, and generally their values continued to play a role in the Polish identity. And even though even after World War II, while the Polish state was generally a communist-based state, such ethos was preserved to a certain degree, and the elite was believed to be communist and socialism-oriented, however, was still based on the liberal, more liberal or more intelligent derived values. I would have posited that even though there was a big change in the Polish society, in the structure of the Polish hierarchy, that the advent of the Soviets after World War II did not change the status or the ideals of the Polish intelligentsia, even though it was marginalized together with the Catholic Church. However, their role was not totally effaced, even under the Soviets. We are now passing to the events of 1968, which was, of course, a central time for the Eastern Europe and the Republic of Poland. This was about 20 years after the Communist Party established its rule over Poland, and a new elite by that time came into being. Generally, people without the roots of what we might call the intelligentsia, with some leftist with some leftist ideals and still trying to establish their position. The conflict was perpetrated between the old leftist intelligence and the nascent communist elite.
And the new intelligentsia raised by the communists, the new elite, you could really compare it to, it's close to Soviet apparatchiks nomenclature, because the state resource was central for this intelligentsia, but for intelligentsia it was mostly cultural, served as resource. And things went as far as confrontation in March '68, where it was the new communist-backed intelligentsia and elite, peasants, workers, had peasant and workers' background. They gained the upper hand, that together with this former intelligentsia, its new generation, would use anti-Semitic slogans at that time. That was this, when they saw the start of a pretty sad anti-Semitic campaign in Poland, where a great number of these former intelligence, first of Jewish background, emigrated Poland, but most certainly stayed in place. And those people, especially a new generation of this left intelligentsia, they left the government, they began to construct autonomous, independent social space. That was the time of the 1970s, when we saw technocrats who came into government. They were less nationalistic. But the new generation gradually would begin to build new independent public space. And very important at that time, this is the revival of the alliance between, that was in part belonged to the former communist elite and central and conservative elite. And a book that was written by one of the best known and a person who still retains key significant hero, Adam Michnik. His book played a crucial role. Its name was Kościół, that is the name of the Polish church, Catholic Church. Sorry, the left Kościół, Catholic Church, and dialogue. It was a dialogue between the left intelligentsia with the conservative intelligentsia. That symbol was whose symbol was Catholic Kościół, Catholic Church in Poland, and they were laid the ground for the anti-communist alliance, and they covered most intelligentsia. Then, 1979, when Karol Wojtyła was elected as Pope, in a year he came to Poland, and solidarity arose very soon. That played the key role as the turning point, as you may know, but which can also be considered as a turning point for strengthening independent, autonomous civic sphere. And this is what was discussed by our ambassador in his speech yesterday, the day before yesterday. I think he has recounted you his students' years at university, which I think took place in the 1980s. It was a time in the 1980s when two parallel public spaces existed. On the one side, that was the civil space on the one side, and on the other side, a stronger, with everyday public social space that was anti-communist in its, who tried to build their own civic model, and mostly they were guided by the anti-communist intelligentsia. What follows was 1989, when communists relinquished power. They, as I would put it, from time to time they would come back into government, but their role never was anything but marginal, especially after the advent of the 21st century. And as I put it again, what we can see today in Poland, it's, in my view, again, I would like to highlight that it's, to my mind, where I'm being very subjective, where the economic sphere, in many ways, was excluded from social space and public space, whereas for what was dominating, it was intelligentsia of all backgrounds and all views. And Rечь Посполита, the Third Republic, this is a state where civil model and civic values are based and were nurtured by the intelligentsia, based upon the values cherished by the intelligentsia, which are in some ways somewhat different from typical Western bourgeois values. And this is where we, again, we the Poles, are debating to which extent this, arguing to which extent this civic model that we propose, in which way it is special, in which way it should be supported, in which way we should try to make it closer. Our values that are typically model of the Western society, we should try to bring them closer of typical Western civil society and our Polish intelligentsia values. So on the one side, you can hear voices here that criticize this Polish model. For example, just because it's very open, it's linked to this heritage of Polish szlachta, that is Polish gentry and nobility. They refer directly to the szlachta and Polish gentry and nobility model, to which extent it reminds that a Polish representative of a Polish intelligentsia is a former szlachtic who has some of his family belong to the Polish nobility, and he automatically is becoming the best representative of Polish intelligentsia, or he should seek to become this Polish szlachtic as a person who wants to embody the ideals of the Polish nobility and gentry. Certainly it could be criticized, and it is being criticized, for not being very much modern ideal of Polish society where it doesn't really matter your family history. The French model, as we know, is based upon quite the contrary and the opposite. The ideas of citizenship, where you're being a citizen, who are equal no matter what their background is. And this brings together the representatives of aristocracy. They abolished the system of where your background mattered. But we can even prove that a typically Western model, that is the French model, that embodies bourgeois values, in point of fact, it really also uses and refers to typically old aristocratic values. Maria Kosowska wrote about it, and her books, Natalia reminded us about her, as she asked the Polish ambassador, although she didn't write much about Polish values, but she would mostly refer to middle class and lower middle class values. But she wrote that in theory the civic model from France moves away from aristocratic values, whereas in point of fact bourgeois elite has accepted and adopted many of these aristocratic values, and in point of fact they have in some way become a new aristocracy, although they keep denying the role of these models. So I suppose in any civic model there is a certain ambiguity about it. First of all, on the one side it speaks for equality, and the Polish model also has a very strong component of social model, which is where citizens are quite equal. But this is where this gives us explanation of this model, that back in 1918 they saw universal nobilitation. It means that all Polish citizens adopted and received the rights of Polish gentry and nobility. That's why they call that before 1918 you would only call a pan or panowie those people who belonged to the nobility, but then every citizen would be addressed in the same manner, which meant equality of Polish civic model at the top level, sort of. And this is where we can explain it. This inclusivity. So nowadays everybody is treated as if he were a szlachcic, as if he belonged to the aristocracy, as if he had nobility ancestry, and he has to cherish their values and be loyal to them. You could certainly argue to which extent this special model can play a positive role, what positive qualities it has. It helps Poland. Here we could use many arguments but the central role of intelligentsia seemingly helps to put a certain limit to the power of business and power of politics. In Poland we do not have oligarchs, and on the other side we don't have politicians like the ones we see in former Soviet Union, politicians who enjoy almost autocratic authority, for whom losing government means losing it all. We have people who just become politicians, and the central role of intelligentsia makes it easy because if you go into politics in Poland, you do not automatically acquire limitless power. No, you just get this. And the social role of intelligentsia probably stabilizes the social structure in Poland. And we can also say that it is adapted to the special conditions of being on the periphery of Europe, where we see very strong economic and political instability. In most countries of Eastern and Central Europe, we have ongoing economic crisis, political revolutions, and so on. And the very existence of this elite that is based upon cultural common past, this stabilizes a society. The worst economic crisis and revolution do not threaten our country because our elite, that is based upon intelligentsia, even if they lose their money and formal power, they will never lose their clout. There's maybe a major problem for them, but it will never deal a structural blow that would be a disaster for the system. This gives great power to intellectuals and to the media. I suppose we have relatively good media, especially print media and newspapers, that hold the government accountable, because the most important reform which intelligentsia speaks for, this is which I think is missing in Russia. You don't have a strong voice by intelligentsia that could remind the society, remind the politicians, remind the business and other actors that there are more important things, more important values and more important objectives for the society, and that would condemn and criticize those who breach these fundamental values. In Poland, as I think, this is something that we do have. You could criticize many things that are going on in Polish political life, but this criticism is very strong within the country. This strong role played by the intelligentsia makes it possible to overcome these negative trends that we see from time to time. Unfortunately, I do not have enough time in my presentation to discuss it, but this criticism is always open and is sometimes very efficient. But on the other side, as I want to wrap up, I'd like to now discuss the cons of this special model. As I was saying, you could criticize this model for being culture-centric. Economy and economics don't seem to matter. Intelligentsia argue about who is best representative intelligentsia? How can you describe Polish identity? Which model of history should be taught at school? But economy really doesn't interest anybody. And this process of economic transformation after 1989 was given away to some experts. For that matter, we have here Marek Dąbrowski, who spoke here yesterday. And many people criticize the things that they did at that time. They adopted pretty radical and pretty liberal model for the country's development, which led to substantial inequality, maybe not that pronounced as we see it in Russia, but it certainly created quite significant social inequality in Poland. But this question was almost never argued and discussed. Intelligentsia didn't much care about it at all. The economic sphere was given away to experts who dealt with it, whereas at the same time representatives of the Polish intelligentsia continued to argue, where do the Polish values lie? Where is their central role? Where is the place of the Polish Catholic Church? And so on. Some people blame the intelligentsia for betrayal. An American sociologist, David Oster, who is friends with Polish intelligentsia, he published a book named Defeat of Solidarity, where the main argument of the book is that intelligentsia elite betrayed Polish workers and solidarity. It used to be in charge of the head of the solidarity movement and represented itself as the workers' movement. Once it came into government, it immediately abandoned their promises and forgot about workers. This argument certainly is very radical, but I suppose there is certain truth behind it, at least in part. It was really the case. And finally, one of the most central arguments for criticizing this Polish model and what is special about it is the central role of intelligentsia. The central criticism is that it is incompatible with traditional Western values. It seems to affirm traditional values, support traditional values, church values. They are fond of recalling the times of Rzecz Pospolita, that was the times when Poland was a strong. This is not modern, as modern Polish intellectuals seem to be criticizing, saying that this central role of bygone values does not make Poland any more democratic, modern, rather making it traditional, pre-modern society. And this is where they see that it would be best to adopt directly Western values, French values, or common Western model. And then, when we would lose these special historic features, all these hidden inequalities, for example, the importance of your origin, if your ancestry belonged to the Szlachta, that is Polish nobility and gentry, this will help us fully integrate with the European and Western European community. But my argument will continue because, as I put it, there are arguments both in favor and against these positions. I suppose I would stop at that, and maybe I can tell you something else in answer to your questions during the Q&A. Thank you. So, dear colleagues, the speaker gave us quite detailed analysis about about the evolution of the Polish intelligentsia. So we now state Q&A. Denis Grekov from Altai region. Well, you told us many interesting things right now. I just realized that I was thinking that the fates of Russia, of Russian intelligentsia and Polish intelligentsia in the 20th century were very similar. They both lived and survived huge upheavals, reprisals, wars, and What do you think? Why is it that the fate is so different, despite these common features? Why is it that the Polish intelligentsia succeeded in maintaining and keeping its role in its society, whereas Russian intelligentsia has serious problems about this, about its failures? What do you think of it? Well, it's hard to give you an answer that would be unambiguous. There are many points in history where we could show significant differences, even the 19th century. That means that their ways diverged. A substantial part of Russian intelligence at that time becomes revolutionary and radical, whereas most representatives of Polish intelligentsia focus on national values, which brought together and made the unity of the nation stronger. But although it has never been full, and was never full at the time, it certainly empowered them, and which in the long run led to the national state that came into being in the 1918. But the very fact that communism came to Russia much earlier and destroyed many things, especially in 1937, 1938, that was physical extermination of traditional Russian intelligentsia, whereas Polish intelligentsia at the time simply avoided this horrible fate. And And I think that those were probably the two most important points, because what followed later was the revival of the intelligentsia in terms of Khrushchev's rule. It was a very different process that was strongly linked to the Soviet state, which explained the social position, the social stand of this new intelligentsia. Whereas for the Polish intelligentsia, the state never mattered as much. It created some just unique virtual system where the state certainly played a very important role, but the intelligentsia was independent of the state. The state rather is more dependent on this elite from intelligentsia than the other way around, whereas in Russian model, this is a strong state which turned out to be much stronger than intelligentsia and elite. And maybe this could be one of the reasons to explain how we could explain the difference in their fate. A question from Kaluga, please, of a graduate of the Moscow School. Evgeny Yevремov from Kaluga region. I live in the province. What is typical, it's a common thing for us that people, wide masses, do not really care, are not really interested about what best representatives of intelligentsia think about something. Tell me, please, how things run. Say, if we look at grassroots level, people living at the bottom and representatives of the intelligentsia, will they listen to them? You are saying they will listen? And give me the last names, please, if you can, if you have this. Who is it that among your intelligentsia who is being listened to by the people who are at the very bottom of the social ladder? Well, I suppose most Polish intelligentsia representative, I suppose nobody's particularly listening to them at the very bottom, because this is the case with intelligentsia, that they're saying something, but nobody seems to be listening. And it's hard to say that ordinary common people and the province in Poland seems to be listening attentively to what the Polish representative of intelligentsia is saying. But I think if we compare ourselves to Russia, because of the influence of intelligentsia on social and public life, their presence in media and their partial control over media, mass media, that's why their voice is very important. As just substantial part of the political elite also belong to the intelligentsia. And I think that here, at this point in time, I don't really know, can we say that there exists could I give you somebody's names who would be, in all cases, be exercising strong influence on most common people. I suppose this time when they enjoy this great authority is probably gone, and this is something that Polish intelligentsia are complaining about. But the intelligentsia as a class still exercise very strong influence, and even if it is not immediate impact, then probably intelligentsia are capable of articulating questions and setting the tone for discussion and debate, which later becomes universal. And if, say, not everybody is bound to agree with the intelligentsia, then intelligentsia sets the tone and makes a significant part of Polish society think about these very important questions. We continue. Lyudmila Klimovich knows the floor. Lyudmila, for that matter, is a historian, and she is studying Russian intelligentsia in emigration. Thank you, Lyudmila Klimovich, Ulyanov region. Well, I have a question, not so much about history. It has to do with modernity. You were speaking about cultural capital. This is what you began your lecture with. My question is, what is the role of cultural capital in reproduction of potential intelligence among the younger generation, both in Russia and in Poland? How do you transfer this, hand over this cultural capital? Well, first of all, in families, this is how it happens. This is the strong point of the reproduction of Polish intelligentsia, that great majority of these values is being taken over by children when they're nurtured to it in school, in family. But then schools and universities, first of all, they're central institutions in our Republican, intelligentsia-ruled republic. And again, another point is when we have some degree of inclusivity about Polish intelligentsia. On the other side, the universities seem to be reproducing former intelligentsia elite, but they also incorporate at this time a significant part of people who did not belong to it before, who would be new to this group. For that matter, some 10 years ago, I ran a study where I compared a comparative study of Polish and Russian intelligentsia, researching Moscow students in university and university students in Warsaw, and I commissioned a survey in Levada Center in Moscow and in Warsaw. And for the first time, we saw the difference that Polish university students seem to be affiliating themselves more with the identity of Polish intelligentsia. But another difference I saw, that in Warsaw universities and institutes, which are not necessarily all elitish, but they're certainly privileged universities and institutes of Polish capital, we have many more peasants who have peasant and workers' ancestry, because whereas in Moscow universities and institutes mostly would be attended by students from families whose parents could be part of intelligentsia, or at least have a university degree. Although Polish institutions are also criticized for being hardly ever accessible for children that do not belong to the families of intelligentsia. But my survey seemed to show that this is the finding, universal finding, that showed that in Poland, given all this elitish character of Polish intelligentsia, Warsaw institutions would be easier to get by people young.
And who have parents with higher education, so more parents have higher education of the children in Poland than in Russia, in Moscow. Pskov Oblast, thank you for the subject you raised. That concerns me very much, and I asked the same question in March this year. So then the elite and the intelligentsia in Russia, and so we ran a parallel between the Shuisky, then Putin role, and the Shuisky rule, then the Putin rule, and then the Godunov's rule, and we compare the intelligentsia between them, and we cannot actually figure out this comparison because the political elite is inextricably mingled, intertwined with business. And so there is an article, Alexei Zudin, he speaks about intelligentsia, saying that the political elite is represented by business, corporate values, actually. So the political elite, which is maybe rooted with business, and what model between the political elite and business you have in Poland right now? So that's a good question, but why would it be difficult to give you a competent answer? Only my impressions. That my immediate thoughts would be as follows. It is true that that the elite and business are connected, but nothing like Russia. Nothing like Russia, because I was saying at the beginning that in Poland we have a big presence of Western capital, global capital in Poland. And so then lots of world global companies are present in Poland, but there are no big Polish companies in Poland, and so maybe just the state, 2-3 large players, state companies, but the majority of companies, large companies, are foreign ones. But medium small business, which is not very well organized, this business is Polish. And so the ruling elites, that's why the impact on the ruling elites is very limited, because businesses are small. But the global corporations so have more influence on the ruling class than local businesses, because they have several tax breaks and benefits for big businesses, Western companies. So they're much more profitable and much more convenient for the Western capital, which is gaining ground, than for Polish capital. So they give more preferences to global companies than Polish capital, which cannot properly self-organize. I don't want certainly to exaggerate, because I don't have the objective data and statistics, but I get the impression that a considerable component of the intelligentsia elite works for those global international corporations, and they have wonderful managerial posts, have good positions appointed, and they certainly help to strengthen those global corporations in Poland. But at the same time, small medium businesses, there is less intelligentsia there, but they have very limited impact as SMEs, and maybe they influence. So because Polish business has a limited influence on Polish politics. And I think that businessmen, there are very few businessmen in the government structures of Poland, and so then there are more. We can see many intelligentsia that occupy high posts in the government than businessmen. But there are some scandals, some corruption scandals occur once in a while. Then when they certainly lobbied the interests of a certain type of business supported by illegally, so by certain persons in the government or in the authorities. But this is a corruption case, but it's not systemic. So, but there is no systemic, no holistic, no sustainable cohesion between the political elite and business. That doesn't exist. So then corruption cases is the exception from the rule rather than the rule. And so then the government is unstable and it changes very rapidly. So the last elections in Poland, if you remember what happened, the former government, so the civil platform, the governing party stayed in power, so got re-elected. And but we need the ruling party should change completely, and that's what we want to do. But it hasn't changed, so it remained in power. So change. This would change. This change of political elites. So we need to do that, which certainly complicates. So the appearance of. So that certainly. And this cohesion, closely knit relationship between business and elite precludes that. Okay. Yes. Introduce yourself. Yes, press the button, please. Alexei Semenov, Pskov Oblast. What my question is as follows. Let me clarify. In my lineage, so there is Polish nobility. So my ancestors are Polish nobles as well. And you mentioned that if we talk 1968, when so Gamulka was the party boss, and so among the intelligentsia there was a lot of anti-Semitic feelings, anti-Jewish feelings. So what happened? So when Pilsudski did some ethnic cleansing. So what about anti-Semitic feelings among the Polish intelligentsia? Anti-Semitic feelings. So what was the trend in the 30s related to Ukrainians and Belarusians? Living next to you. So you wanted to assimilate them. So what the majority of the intelligentsia, they spoke for assimilation or segregation or just flexible cultural integration of Ukrainian and Belarusian intelligentsia and national elite into the Polish elite, or ethnic cleaning and the anti-Semitic. In Russia, there is such a phenomenon, pseudo-intelligentsia, we call, people are kind of educated. So, for example, the Maidan events prove that. So there is this outbreak of activities. So then the new myth that the Ukrainians are broken up Russians, and then there is no such thing as a Ukrainian nation. Yes, and that the Ukrainian language is a broken Russian language, and so these feelings run high. So, are there any anti-Ukrainian sentiments among the Polish intelligentsia, or there is no such thing? Thank you. Thank you. That's with regards to the World War II period. So these issues that you're asking the central points of political debates, the main points, because the Polish political scene was organized vis-a-vis this issue that was raised, the model of integration of national minorities. So on the one hand, so Roman Mosky, so one politician on the one hand, one is the national Democrat, and Józef Pilsudski, the former socialist, on the other extreme, so the integration model. So he and all these 20 years, so the main debate was among those two extremes, the adherents of Dmowski, and who sometimes were very openly anti-Semitic and outspoken about it, and so they made such pronouncements. And on the other hand is those who sided with Pilsudski, who wanted to build the Polish national model on the basis of universal model. So where this it's not the civil identity rather than national identity based issue. And so this debates between the two wars, so they took different shapes and forms, different turns. So National Democrats never got the power. Formally, they never ruled. because the adherents of Pilsudski, they seized power and during that period and blocked so all pronouncements of the another extreme. But they were quite powerful and influential, and in Polish universities at certain point of time, so they had special desks for Jews. So the Jews had to sit in the back of class. But certainly the socialists were against it, and especially the adherents of Pilsudski spoke sharply against it. And so then, so even they were not Jews, they sat at those desks, being not Jews, so they kind of boycotted. And the same was true of Ukrainians, Belarusians, other national minorities. But there was a growing popularity of this nationalistic model, by the way, under the influence of German influence, because Germany was considered to be an example, and that's why the ruling, so descendants of Pilsudski sometimes took very radical principles. So the churches were closed down, etc. So they followed the extreme manifestations of that policy. But there were always people who were against this policy. So there were all those, so to provide certain autonomy to Ukrainians, but they were in minority. Certainly no one, this project never took any form or shape, and that was never implemented. And but the autonomy. But in the post-war years, so these issues became less important, less relevant, because the majority of national minorities disappeared. And so then Poland became a mononational state, a single nation state. So very few Jews, some Germans, but there were so few that this national was never brought into point again. And so that's in 1968, as you remembered. So it was just an episode rather than a continuous expression of a certain trend. No, and so it was because that part of the communist elite and the proclamations, anti-Semitic declarations, they were supported by some people, but very few. But thank God that these anti-Semitic feelings they were not important, were not strong at that time anymore. And so even if someone goes back to these anti-Semitic declarations, and so then they are not a force anymore, and they are not considerable, have no considerable presence now, and it's not a central problem anymore of Polish political scene, because it's because these debates from the war times, so they remember this between those guys, Pilsudski and the other guys. So but those are historic debates, and but the background is gone, and so there's no foundation. It makes no sense. And the Ukrainians living in Poland, so there are very few Ukrainians in Poland now, and so they do not. The attitude to them is. Besides a local relationship, so it never just morphs into something considerable because of their little numbers. It's not a subject of political debate, but what's happening in Ukraine is positive. So they support Ukraine, and so the intelligentsia, the elite support unanimously. Maidan. And certainly there are Poles who remember the old times, and they remind Ukrainians of what they did to Poland so that it's their fault. But it's all gone most, and the impact is very limited. But it does not influence what is happening in Ukraine right now. So the attitude is positive. I would like to recommend you a book. It was written by the expert of the school, Anna Applebaum. The book is titled "The Iron Curtain in 1943, 1953." So we're going just to publish it in Russian this year. 43, 53, and so Applebaum pays attention to these issues. So there is a chapter dedicated to ethnic cleansing, violence, and in Eastern Europe and also there is a lot of time dedicated to Poland. So the Celts history, and the Wisla operation, when Ukraine just moved the population from that area, so relocation of Ukrainians after World War II. So it's all there in that book. Relocation. Thank you, Professor Tambov Oblast Association of Car Owners. My question: we all know very well the time on the threshold, the 90s and the 80s. So this social negative feeling, organized crime, and in Poland, organized crime flourished as well. 80s, 90s. So we understand. So there's perestroika. So the accumulation of initial capital, private property, in all post-Soviet republics and countries. So this organized crime flourished, and different countries has handled this issue differently. But how did Polish society manage to counteract organized crime, and how did you manage to do away with it eventually? And what was the role of the intelligentsia in fighting in fighting this organized crime? And have you ever given the definition, the evaluation of what happened and why it happened, and historically reflected? Yeah, certainly there was this problem like everywhere, but I'm not sure that it's been addressed fully. And so because certainly the influence of organized crime is much limited now compared to the 90s. It's much less now, because once in a while, so they speak about the existence of those organized criminal groups, but their importance is limited now. So they've been debilitated. Their role compared to what we had in the 90s or the early 2000s, so it's especially the east of Poland, so much less now, much weaker. They've been weakened, and the role of intelligentsia, I hope that they influenced positively and contributed to the decrease of crime, and building the states, because the state service system that we so there's corruption, so it's not ideal, and the state is quite weak in Poland, but I think that there is a certain influence of intelligentsia idealism, idealistic views in public officials, and so who were educated, who were raised in principles of morality and intelligentsia values. So they've been brought up in those along the lines of those principles. And the role of the media papers very strong in Poland as well. Maybe so they certainly contributed to lessening the intensity of this problem, because the intelligentsia created to a great extent, and they support those papers and the media, and so they're very critical voices, and so they're appealing to the state once in a while to be more drastic, to to try to deal with these issues in a more energetic way. And so then the problem of, but I'm not an expert in organized crime. So please, so you need certainly to relate your subjects. Your questions need to be related to the point that our speaker was making. Malinetsk autonomous region. My question has to do with Poland. In my view, the majority understands a mononational a single national state, and so with one perception, single state perception. Your integration, so members of the European Union you are, and so the values of multiculturalism. So that's to what extent? So you are one of them. So to what extent Polish intelligentsia will be able to maintain its national identity? Does this globalization process and this merging into aren't you afraid to lose your national identity among the Polish intelligentsia and dissolve in the bigger community? That's one of the central issues of intellectual life of Poland. And the response, if you asked this question among Polish in Polish community society, so the questions would be different. The answers would be completely different. So there would be extremes. The whole range of answers. So some would say, because the liberal part would give you one answer, Polish liberal intelligentsia would give you one answer. So who would say the negative? So say no, it's not an issue, it's not a problem. This issue is normal. It does not. So the whole process of integration does not threaten the Polish identity. So we need to acquire European values because they do not go counter to Polish values. Only European Union gets stronger, and they synergize. They help each other. It's great. So we need to move further into the European community. But some members of the Polish intelligentsia, they would agree with your concern, with your apprehension, because it's a threat for Polish identity, and some are more conservatives, and so they are Eurosceptics, and they remember the arguments to the fact that these global processes threaten Polish national identity. And so they weaken the traditional national identity and religious values as well, and because they are key for Polish national identity, and this is all related to the role of the Catholic Church in Poland, in Polish. For liberals, it's less important or just so marginal. And it's not important at all. So they wanted even just a more clear division between the national life and the church. And but for conservatives, so the church is the central element of Polish identity. But globalization has to do with secularization and the weakening of the importance. So the church, they see it as a threat, for Polish identity, because for them it is based on the Catholic Church and revolves around it. But if you ask me, I would be certainly on the side of liberals, because I think that the Polish intelligentsia is autonomous, and so they are well adapted, because look at the 19th century when the entire system was formed and there was no Polish state at all, and the intelligentsia managed to create this world of Polish culture, identity, etc. And I think that whatever happens, it will certainly keep this autonomy, cultural autonomy, intact. So maybe it will. So then the economy will be different, and politics is different, but cultural with the globalization going on so fast, I think that because the intelligentsia will control the cultural points, the most important cultural heights, because they're kind of intermediaries between culture and economics, and they will certainly support Polish culture and the Polish national cultural autonomy and identity. I think they can handle that. Anton Timchenko, Moscow Oblast. Thanks for the wonderful presentation. Then my question: in the Russian, there is an idea that the intelligentsia is a kind of it's the middle of the society. It's one of the layer, and that actually develops the morality of the state, of the people, of the nation. And so they are, but the intelligentsia in the West are intellectuals. And so then the Polish expert, so the lecture about it, what do you think? So this division, so the intelligentsia and intellectuals, are these two things different, or they are the same? Because in Russia we think that intelligentsia, and in your country you call them intellectuals. And so I would adhere to the opinion that that's an important difference, intelligentsia and intellectuals. So difference, because typical Western society and our Central European society, because intellectuals are first and foremost, it's a function, it's a role that a person can perform, and intelligence is it's a social status. A person can be born among intelligentsia, and so many members of the intelligentsia. So in Poland, there were the people who were born into the intelligentsia families, and so they are kind of condemned. They have to be there because they were born into this intelligentsia family, so they will be raised in a way for them to understand that this intelligentsia component is part, integral part of their status, of their education. So because they were born with it, they were born the intelligentsia. But such mechanism does not exist in the majority of Western countries, because they refer to them as intellectuals. So that they come from different fields, and they form this community of intellectuals, which is not sometimes transferred to the next generation, because the children of intellectuals, they will not play this role, not necessarily. They may not be intellectuals, but the intelligentsia become intellectuals. So the intelligentsia become intellectuals. So such famous intelligentsia members, they are intellectuals. But besides intellectuals, so there are many members of the intelligentsia who play different public roles. And so these are this is a big difference. So you are born the intelligentsia, or you acquire become an intellectual. So that's why. So for better understanding, so just to understand the special role of intelligentsia, so we need to distinguish between these two things. Sochi, last question. Yeah, the mic. Oh, you turn off the mic. Mr. Tomasz, thank you very much for the wonderful broadening discussion. It's not a question, it's a comment, but short comment. I wanted to tell you that we're talking today about the so-called external signs of intelligence, so which are in the family. They are kind of congenital, so they are given with birth in the family, and they are a category, the elite category, and so from which intellectuals grow, actually. And but we forgot that there is internal intelligence so which has a certain set of values, and so the inner intelligence, intelligent member can be born in any social environment. So it can be self-educated and self-become a member of intelligence. I agree absolutely. Yeah. Sociologically, that this definition was, and I was kind of was inclined to more. When I was talking about the social reproduction of the intelligence, because I concentrated too much on this aspect of the intelligence, this family-born intelligence, and the role of this congenital, this reproduction of family intelligence. But you agree? I agree with you, because you don't have to be born a member of intelligence. You can become an intelligence and intelligent person, and this is very important value. But the intelligence is open to anyone who wants to acquire, who ready to acquire the values of the intelligence, is welcome to become one of the intelligentsia. And so then they will become a fully fledged member of the intelligentsia with all the implications. And I forgot to stress it, but it's a very important point, and it's very important element of the intelligentsia identity. So thank you that you stressed that point. Okay, in my view, Professor Zarycki, so he gave us a very well argued and comprehensive and streamlined presentation. And I liked it very much that we have a wider number of Polish experts coming to us, and this is very important. And I hope that Mr. Zarycki maybe will visit us next seminar. So let's applaud him. Before we take lunch, one housekeeping remark. So there will be a change in the program because Irina Prokhorova called in sick, and we'll have Kastoyeva Jean right after lunch, then Norway by plan, then Boris Grozovsky before lunch, and then Gordon after dinner. He will invite you for, but this is not mandatory anymore. And so after dinner, I spoke to Gordon, so you don't have to come because it's it's voluntary. But if you're interested, you may come and listen to him. And it's very good, interesting points he's making. And bon appetit.